What's up, y'all? It's the Dr. Investor, and welcome back to my channel where we talk about real estate investing, personal finance, personal growth, and entrepreneurship. Today I have a very fire video for you guys. Today I'll be talking about the most common tenant-landlord disputes. So you know what to do before I get into the topic. Make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a comment, and I'll be right back with the topic you don't want to miss out. Real estate is an amazing vehicle to build wealth, gain generational wealth, and to get additional cash flow. But when you are a real estate investor and you're a buy and hold investor, you are renting out your property to tenants. And these tenants are people. And when you deal with people on any facet, there is a potential for disputes to arise. I would highly recommend, if you are a landlord, to go to Landlord-Tenant court in your jurisdiction. This is very important because here you'll see the most common issues that landlords are bringing to the courtroom, as well as where tenants bring into the courtroom, and see how the judges ruling on these issues. Because if you're a landlord, there is a chance a tenant may take you to court, or you may take a tenant to court. So it's important to see how judges are ruling on these common issues. Just going to landlord-tenant court, you can be proactive on these common rulings that you're seeing in landlord-tenant court. You can be proactive on these things when it comes to your house rules or your lease that you make tenants sign, and the ground rules that you set in place for your property. That way you can try to avoid, to your best ability, ending up in landlord-tenant court, because you do not want to end up there. It is very important to understand if you live in a tenant-friendly or a landlord-friendly jurisdiction. Because if you live in a tenant-friendly jurisdiction and you're a landlord, good luck getting that person out of your property, even if they violate your lease. Because in tenant-friendly jurisdictions, they tend to favor the tenant, and it's hard for a landlord to get that person out of your property. It's going to cost you a lot of headache, a lot of time, and a lot of money. So this video is going to tell you the most common things that landlords have to deal with. So now let me get into the most common landlord-tenant disputes. So the most common reasons that you see landlords and tenants in landlord-tenant court is because of non-payment of rent. There can be a wide array of reasons on why the tenant didn't want to pay rent. The tenant may have intended to pay rent, but they just came across a hard time and just cannot afford to pay rent. Anytime you have downturns within your local market, you're going to see tenants be more squeezed for money. This is because it's usually an inflationary environment that they're dealing in, so everything's much more expensive. And when you have these downturns, depending on where the individual works, their company may be doing layoffs. And unfortunately, a lot of people end up on the bad side of these layoffs and end up losing their jobs. And as many of us know, many Americans do not have any savings. They're living paycheck to paycheck. So they're depending on that paycheck to pay that rent. If they lose their job, which in turn means they lose their every 2 weeks of pay, that means they cannot afford to live in your property, and therefore they can't afford to pay you rent. Sometimes it's not because they don't want to, it's because they just don't have it. I rent to Section 8 tenants, so majority of the rent is subsidized by the government. Anywhere from 60% to the government completely paying the rent. So when there is these downturns in the market, such as recessions, global pandemics such as COVID-19, which we were just in not too long ago, if an individual loses their job and they cannot pay their portion of what Section 8 expects them to pay, they can just go to the housing authority and tell them they lost their job, and the housing authority will cover their portion, because they want to make sure that individual still has a place to live, and they want to make sure that landlord still gets his or her monthly rent. Many people do not like Section 8 for a plethora of reasons. A lot of it is because they have a lot of misconceptions about the program. But I can say one thing, regardless if there's a global pandemic, a market downturn, if there's an inflationary environment going on, it doesn't matter what's happening. You will always get your rent no matter what. You know who's getting their rent paid during the COVID-19 pandemic and didn't have to worry about late payments? It was the individuals who were renting out the Section 8 tenants, because the U.S. government does not miss payments. It is important as a landlord that you set very clear guidelines of the expectations for the tenant on when rent is due. If rent is not paid by this given date, let's say the 3rd of the beginning of the month, then you will assess a late fee to that tenant. And if you do not pay this late fee, what would be the additional consequence? It's important they understand this. This language should be written out in your lease, written out in your house rules, because it's very important language. I would say, in my experience, many tenants, they want to pay their rent, but just came across tough times. So ways to mitigate this is connecting your tenants with rent assistance programs. There's many organizations that exist across the U.S. So make sure you give these resources to your tenant. Make sure you give the information of these organizations to your tenants so they can contact these individuals and hopefully get rent assistance, because they cannot pay their rent. That way, the tenant's able to pay their rent and you as a landlord is able to get their rent. Another common dispute amongst tenant and landlords is the security deposit. So typically the security deposit is 1 to 2 months of rent and is withheld by the landlord until the individual moves out to cover any damages that may occur to the property. Here are some reasons a landlord can withhold a security deposit. They include breaking or terminating a lease early, not paying your rent, any damage to the property, any cleaning costs that the landlord may incur in the unit the tenant is residing in, and utilities the tenant did not pay. To avoid any confusion on what a tenant can expect to pay if something is broken, when you do your move-in checklist, have the tenant sign it. Make sure the tenant's able to verify the condition of the property when they first moved in. And then additionally, as a landlord, I would recommend putting price by every line item within the move-in checklist. That way the tenant knows if this item is damaged, how much they can expect to be subtracted from the security deposit. In Chicago, I'm not too sure about other jurisdictions, Section 8 will pay for that security deposit. Tenants typically want all the money that they gave to you back. That is why it is such a common dispute amongst the landlord and the tenant when it comes to the security deposit. It is important that you communicate to your tenants of what they can expect to pay if an item is damaged or if they violate any of those items that I mentioned earlier. In Illinois, just like many other jurisdictions, they require that your security deposit be in an escrow account earning interest. So if that is the case, make sure that the security deposit is withheld in this escrow account. And I'm not sure about other jurisdictions, but I live in Chicago, so Section 8 will pay for the totality of that security deposit. They will expect it back if the tenant moves out, but if the tenant causes any property damage, you can withhold the amount of damage that the tenant caused to that property and subtract it from the security deposit. Another common landlord-tenant dispute is that tenant causing property damage to the unit. It is important as a landlord to have clear expectation for that tenant for the upkeep of that property. Landlords are expected to repair the property and expect normal wear and tear within the property, of course, and someone's living in it. But if there is damage that is beyond the normal wear and tear, it's typically the tenant's responsibility to pay for, not the landlord's responsibility. What I do to assess the upkeep of the property while the tenant is living in there, I do inspections of that property every 3 to 4 months so I can see the condition of the property, and if there's any fixes that need to be done. If there's something that comes out of my pocket, I will fix it early and get on top of it. If it's more than normal wear and tear and it's something the tenant must pay for, I will make the tenant aware that this needs to be fixed, and we can get on top of it early, and I make sure I communicate with them so we have clear expectations, because I do not want to end up in landlord-tenant court, and I also want my property to be in tip-top shape, in great condition. The next common tenant-landlord dispute is the condition of the unit that the tenant is inhabiting. So it's very important as a landlord that you're making timely repairs on the unit, as well as making sure that that unit's up to code and is a safe and healthy unit for the tenant to live in. And some landlords do not abide by this. They are very late with the maintenance requests, have the tenant living in unbearable conditions, and many tenants get fed up with this. Unfortunately, many landlords do not comply with the health code set in place for properties to be deemed safe and healthy for individuals to inhabit. Many tenants just get fed up. They're living in units with cockroaches crawling all over, elevators not working, doors not working, water not running, appliances being broken. As you can imagine, this is very frustrating for a tenant, and is a major reason many landlords and tenants go to landlord-tenant court and have disputes among this. On the other side too, there's many low-quality tenants that are not taking great care of the properties, causing many damage to the property. There's an expectation the landlord may have for the upkeep of the property, but the tenant may not agree with that landlord and may be damaging that property. And a landlord may be so fed up with all the damage that this tenant is causing, and all the headaches this tenant is causing, and will take them to landlord-tenant court. As a landlord, you have the right to inspect your property. You have to make sure there's fair warning to your tenant though. But because it's your property, you can outline on your lease that you would like to inspect the property within this given time frame within your lease. And if the tenant does not comply with that, they're in violation of your lease, and that's termed for an eviction. So I would advise you as a landlord to make sure you're checking up on your property, because the individual you may have put in it, you may think this is a great individual that will take care of your property, but you should see with your own eyes if this individual is actually taking care of your property. Because as you know, repairs to rental properties can range in the tens and thousands of dollars depending on what needs to be repaired, and you do not want that situation where you're just dumping so much money into a unit that's being damaged by a tenant, because you're in this to make money, you're in this to build wealth. You do not want someone within your property that is causing you to lose a lot of money. It is very important as a landlord to make sure you have great communication with your tenants. Make sure they understand the standards of what you expect of tenants in your property. This is the best way to avoid any disputes. One of these ways that you can communicate well with your tenant, which all landlords must do, is have them sign a lease. I have an ironclad lease. It details everything I will and not accept within the property, and they're within Illinois state guidelines. And 18 pages is quite a bit. Most tenants are not going to read 18 pages, but I make sure I highlight in bold the most important things within that lease, and make sure I communicate to them those designated areas to make sure they understand that these are things I'm a stickler on for tenants within my property. Another thing I make tenants sign are house rules. This also goes hand in hand with the lease, but these are just daily house things I set for the tenant. So that's a wrap on this video on common landlord-tenant disputes. If you like this video, you know what to do. Make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a comment. This is the first video I'm going to drop of the new year. My expectation for this year is to gain 5,000 subscribers. I'm at around 950, but I know with you guys' help, I can get to that goal. And if you know anybody that will benefit from my content, make sure you tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend to watch my videos and subscribe to my page. The Dr. Investor is out.